Hello, everybody, and welcome to this conversation. I am so pleased to have you here. My name is Viola Green from the International Institute of Family Development, and I have some heavyweights, some big superstars here, both on the continent of Africa, in the United States, and in Europe, to have this conversation with us today about bringing forward industrial advancement through U.S. Africa manufacturing, really creating a transatlantic employment pathways. This conversation is brought to you today by Pitch Roll Fast and the International Institute of Family Development. We are hosting this event on the sidelines, on the margins of the Biden Harris US Africa Summit, which will be happening next week, December 13th through the 15th, 2022, in Washington, D.C. Africa overall is growing as a global partner. And we're exploring today in this conversation what it would look like, what it would take in order to create Africa as the continent, as the place of manufacturing and production. What would that mean for the United States? What would that mean for Africa? What would it take in order for it to occur? And we have some really big guests here that I want to start to introduce everyone on the panel and read a bit of their bios so that you can know about them. So first, I'll introduce them, say their names, and then I'll go back and introduce their bios. So first we have Abdul Rashid and Omidia, who is here from Nigeria. He is the managing director of QSOL Consulting. We have Usman Toure here. He is the chairperson for the Young Ancestors Foundation, the Gambia. We have Lawrence Schaefer here from Schaefer Global Management. He's in the United States of America. We have Quentin Kankume, who is here. He is the Vice Chancellor from Harare Institute, or HIT, of Technology at University in Zimbabwe. We have Mbemba Jabi here. He's the Director of Investment and Promotions for African countries from Ireland. And we have Bogami Magu. He's a professional associate from the Nelson Mandela University. So first, I want to tell everybody, welcome to this conversation, and to give a bit of background about each one of the guests that we have here. As I pull that up on my handy dandy notes, I want to take this opportunity to let everyone know, our listening audience, that Pitch Roll Fast, Shiraz Benzame is here all the way. She's in France, but she's from Algeria. She'll be providing closing remarks, summarizing everything that is being said, and really putting very concisely our pathway forward in order to bring this to a reality. So Shiraz, please give a welcome as I pull up everyone's bios here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this amazing discussion we're going to have. Thank you again, Viola, and all our amazing speakers. We're looking forward to diving into your brains to really discussing this U.S. Africa manufacturing, to know from your side what can be done, what is done, and how are we going to change, I like to say, the narrative when it comes to that, and really shedding into light the real opportunities, and actually stop maybe just an extent at some point saying that there are opportunities, but realities and really what is done on the ground. I'm really excited to the conversation, and I'm sure once Viola will share each and every quick bios of our speakers, you will see how amazing their perspective will be for this conversation.
Fantastic. So I'll start off with this bio. Again, I cannot do justice to everyone. They've done a remarkable amount of work over their entire lifetimes. And so as I'm looking through the bios, I'm like, which part do I really pull through? And so as we have this conversation, you'll hear from each one of our panelists the depth and breadth of their commitment to the work, to the field, and their passion. So we have Abdul here. He is the managing director for QSOL Consulting Limited. It's an energy advisory He's also an energy advisory board member and strategist for ESG, Energy Industry Sustainability. He's equipped with 25 years of experience. I told you how powerful this group is. 25 years of experience in energy industry, oil, gas, power, and renewables, spanning over 4 continents: Europe, the Middle East, and North America. So that's just one person that we have here. Usman Toure, he is a young, passionate Pan-Africanist that I can attest to for sure. He is a compelling speaker, born and bred in the Gambia, and he is involved in many efforts throughout the continent, fostering Afrocentric development narratives, calling the African populace to unite, to own and to reclaim the African development narrative. So we thank him for his time and his commitment and work to this. We have Dr. Schaefer here. I have his bio up. Dr. Schaefer, Dr. Lawrence D. Schaefer, is a strong businessman. He has a good sense of character and self, and was forged at a young age to his humble beginnings as a third-generation farmer to a family-owned business established in 1868. Dr. Schaefer is currently teaching aquaponics at Bowie State University in the District of Columbia, which is in Washington, D.C. And Dr. Schaefer is partnering with community organizations and farmers all over the world. And I can tell you that that is happening right now in Liberia. He's doing a lot of work there and in other places. Dr. Schaefer is a personal business owner and entrepreneur, and he is a successful koi pond business for 12 years, including the design, installation, and management of several commercial and residential custom-created koi pond water feature fountains, light plants, and imported koi at many locations in the National Capital Region. So we have another bio here of our guest that you definitely don't want to miss is Bemba Jabi, holds a Bachelor's of Science in Development and Studies and a Master's of Science in Agricultural and Rural Development and a Master's of Arts in Management. Bemba is a founder and managing director of the Jabi Group Limited, a business management consultancy company based in Ireland and in the Gambia. He's also director of the Consulting Ireland, an established business support organization that provides commercial services to businesses with global ambitions. These are our guests today. And if I forgot to anyone, that means that I do not have your bio up and handy, but please come to the floor and really give a bit of background about yourself. I know that I'm missing a particular bio here. But with that, we'll start off the conversation with what is the opportunity that we have before us. The United States is coming together with Africa in the next week to really discuss our way forward as a whole, to really outline partnerships, relationships that are happening. And we have the opportunity to really think through in this conversation, how can manufacturing play a part in that? And so the first question to the floor is, what is your vision for a U.S.-Africa bilateral relationship that establishes manufacturing facilities in Africa that can create jobs across the supply chain on both continents? Floor is open, and what are your thoughts?
Viola, can I go first?
If you pay me $5, you can go first.
All right, very well. So I'll credit you $5.
Okay.
All right, so thank you very much for having me here, and it's a pleasure to be here today. So to address head-on the vision that we see for the Africa-U.S. relationship, I would first of all like to quote the Vice President of the United States, Vice President Kamala Harris. In one of her words, she said, "Our administration goal is to promote inclusive and sustainable economic growth and development across the continent, Africa, to expand capital flows and to promote the vibrant spirit of entrepreneurship and innovation that is so prevalent across Africa. And I underline the word prevalent. And also, the United States start to see Africa as a role to play in not just as a market for US export, but as a major partner in key value chains. Now, the US producers and manufacturers tend to use Africa as a place to manufacture product as they do in the other parts of the world already, like in China. Now, having that at the back of our mind, let's take a look at Africa. Where is Africa positioned today? With the projected growth of quarter of the earth population by 2050 and a median age of 20, Africa appears poised to replace China as both a giant consumer market for American goods and services as the world's factory. Now, if we look at those two situations, you see that there is a position that Africa is taking in the fourth industrial revolution. Just as it happened in China, just as it happened in India, I think the next big El Dorado is going to be Africa. So it is important for Africa to have the resources required to harness all the opportunities ahead of Africa. And we start to see a very positive growth in the way Africa is growing. You know, a continent that has been called hopeless nation or hopeless continent in the past, that now have to see a glimpse of hope as the world start to turn around to listen more to Africa, to see what can we do to help Africa achieve its greatness, its position in the world. And it's no doubt that today Africa has a very large resources that the whole world require today. And a very good example is if you look at your cell phone. A lot of the raw materials or earth materials you use in producing a cell phone come in from Africa. They are shipped to China and then refined, produced into a cell phone, and then distributed all over the world. So my vision of Africa is a continent that is not just a consuming continent or a consumer market, but a self-sustainable market that has that can manufacture its own product, take this raw material, complete a manufactured final product, and add all the value chain of what this product can produce, and we can consume a made in Africa, and we can export an high quality made in Africa to the whole world. And this can be possible with the support of our friends from the international community.
I just love your comments because we often talk about, exporting. Most of the folks that when I'm in the continent and you guys can come into this piece here are looking to get their products into the large name markets here in the United States and Europe. And they're always asking, Viola, how can the International Institute, how can you and your partners do that? I love your point about made in Africa, because made in Africa also means that local continental Africans are making products that are germane to the needs of their community, to their markets, and there's some pride and there's a business aspect to that. And most often we don't hear about that. I just really want to lift that up and thank you for your comments, because those are spot on ways of looking at the world. Anybody else want to come into that particular question?
So Viola?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for hosting this. Thank you everybody for being here. So let's talk about the beast, Africa, how Africa has been treated. Africa is the richest continent in the world. We could say continent because it's not a country, it's a continent, because so many people refer to Africa as a country. But it's the richest continent in the world. But what's been happening historically is every engagement by world powers and all the other countries to Africa has been not in the form of trying to build them up and lift them up, but it's more in the form of exploitation. So now we're in the world now of catchphrases like sustainability, resiliency. So now the push forward is how can we build up a people and nations and a whole continent, leveraging the natural resources that they have in their hands so that we can help them transition. It makes no sense to me how you have a country who has freedom for, let's say, 50 years or more, and they're still a developing country. And there's no pathway set for them to transition from being a developing country to a developed country. The UN doesn't have it. Nobody has that pathway. And all these projects that are being brought to these countries are one-off projects. There is some integration in some economic development plans that some countries have put together, but really there's no strategic overall plan. The African Union has been working a while to try to organize those things. The Africa Free Trade Agreement is a great step forward to allow countries to be able to exchange across borders without having those issues. But if we can really lift up the people, then we will reduce the conflict. So that's some of the instability that's happening in countries, this conflict, and it's motivated a lot of times by extreme poverty, generational extreme poverty, and hunger. And people are just hungry. East Africa has got drought after drought after drought, and if it's not drought, it's locusts. And cattle are dying, people are dying. They're projecting millions of more people dying. The Ukraine situation, all it did is expose what it was already there. The vulnerability of people all over Africa, and even the refugees in the Syrian valley from that conflict. But it exposed what was already there. People are hungry. People are living off of one meal a day, making less than $50 a month. It makes no sense. And then you talk about countries that want to talk about blockchain and all these other high tech things that they want to bring to a country where you still got people walking in the field with flip flops, digging the hole in the ground, trying to plant plants just to survive. So that makes no sense to me in the disconnect of people when they talk about economic development plans. So let's talk about a serious way to structure these economic development plans, investing in infrastructure, leveraging the natural resources. You got some countries now that are finally doing reserve banks. Countries are printing gold coins for money. They're finally getting a clue on how to leverage their natural resources. So if we can do this strategic plan, we're doing it in Liberia, creating our own bank, doing the mining, keeping some of the gold in country to establish a reserve bank so that we can use those natural resources then to fund everything else. Because foundationally, all these projects, all this economic development, if you can't talk about funding and where you're going to find the financing to do these things, then you're not in business.
Absolutely. Lifting up here the expertise that is coming from everybody on this panel is amazing. A pathway forward. Manufacturing seems to be a pathway forward for countries in order to move ahead or to be a first world continent, the richest continent on in the planet. Is not a first world continent, and we're looking at a pathway to create that. And I just love that. And so I just want to bring this question again one more time around to anybody who might want to add their voice to this question. And because we do have other questions to kind of go through, but if this is a question that you have some passion about, and that question again is, what's your vision? What is your vision for a U.S. bilateral relationship to establish manufacturing in Africa to create jobs across the supply chain in the continent? Please add your voice.
Thank you, Viola, and thank you, everyone, the panelists. It's a very good, interesting question. For me, I think we just need to look at the historical context of relationship between America and the African continent. Development is one thing, but I think there's still a lot of kind of misinformation in terms of looking at African continent. If you look at development itself, it's actually driven by a historical context of aid, like aid development instead of business, trade, and investment. So this has been the rhetoric in terms of development aid by the aid agencies, and the story is not really great in terms of representation. When you look at fundraising, the portrayal of Africa in the media and by aid agencies, this is something that first of all, we just need to see how do we address that, because that also is kind of a stumbling block. But Africa has moved on from that in the last couple of years and see we want development. People talk about natural resources. We are talking about manufacturing. All these things are there, but what is actually missing now is mainly the financial resources in terms of how do we get people into work, but how do we produce, how do we change these products like the raw materials into manufactured goods. And I think this is the way the relationship should be forged. It's not only about like having a summit. Having summit is fine, but how do we get investors
Yeah.
to actually go to African countries and then partner with Africans who have ideas in terms of manufacture? Because there are so many areas. Agriculture is one thing. There's abundant land, the workforce is there, but some of the resources are lacking. When you look at the energy, renewable energy, there's a vast opportunities of renewable energy on the continent, whereby people can go into manufacturing solar panels or windmills and other form of energy as well. Somebody, I don't know whether it's Rashid or Lawrence, talking about infrastructure development. So these are some of the areas I think people can go into, but it's a network of webs that need to be figured out to see how Africa can move. Without us figuring that out, I think still now is kind of a really hurdle. But it's an opportunity to have these discussions and see who is actually willing to go there. Africa is open. Before, people have a lot of misconceptions about business being difficult in Africa, corruption and other things. These are things happening everywhere. And we know that, like for example, I live in Ireland. Ireland didn't develop because of governments alone. It developed because of investments, the Irish diaspora. So these are some of the things that we need to actually look into and connect with African countries as well, because the potential is there. It's not only for Africans to develop, but anyone who goes to Africa, you'll grow as well as an individual or a company investor or a government. So these are things that we need to look into and see. The challenges we are talking about, they are there, but we can actually walk around those solutions, especially when we link with the African diaspora who are interested to actually see Africa moving forward. Thank you.
I'm so glad that you brought up the African diaspora, and I'll give a short story before we go to the next question. I was in Lamine in the Gambia. I enjoy being in the Gambia. I'm there quite often, and I was there with my children, and so oranges were coming off the tree, and so we were just sitting around, and the kids were kicking the Gambian kids were kicking the oranges, and so my daughter was just like picking them up, like, do you know how expensive these things are? She's putting them in a basket, like, we got to take these things home. And so she's like, but there's no orange juice. And so we went to the store, we went to the market, it's around Turntable. And we're there, and it's a market that is not owned by local Gambians again. And the products, when we started to look for the orange juice, were all imported from nations that that were far, far away. And I brought that to the attention of my children. My last born son is 14, and I said, I know college, we talk about these things, but you could solve a problem and you could earn a good living for yourself if you figured out how to squeeze these oranges, sell them, and sell this juice, and you would give people jobs. You would have opportunity. And so when I look at the opportunities there, both we need the financing, right? Because, Lawrence really talked about, you got to have some finance, you got to have a structure in place in order to take some of the resources you have naturally and monetize that. And you got to be able to produce to local market intra-Africa, not just export, but intra-Africa, and then to export. So I just love that there's solutions, and the diaspora can play a role in that. There are manufacturing firms here in the U.S., in the Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latin world that can come together. And what are the right networks, to your point, Bemba, in order to make that happen? These are remarkable comments. We're going to move on to the next question. What is the benefit to the United States? What is the benefit, particularly to the United States, of how having a manufacturing and a production facility, having Africa as a source of manufacturing, are good for the United States? And if you can add on to that, how does this help the Build Back Better initiative of President Joe Biden? What are your thoughts?
Nobody wants to jump in. I guess I can jump in.
Okay.
Uh, So the goal of the U.S. Using the government agencies like the State Department and the USAID, for example, the goal of the USAID is to leverage American resources um, to help stabilize countries to make them better partners, trading partners. Because obviously, the world economy, you need trading partners. You won't be able to produce everything internally for your sustainability as a country. So there's essential need for international trade. And the building up trading partners is essential for that stability of that commerce that's created through that. Now, the Build Back Better plan you referenced, it's broken up into three parts. I'm looking over at my reference here. The America Rescue Plan was first, and that was for the COVID-19 relief. The American Jobs Plan really is what you're talking about, creating infrastructure, creating manufacturing.
That's right.
Um, Somebody asked me, well, who's the greatest shea butter producer in the world? And obviously, you think, well, geez, it must be Africa because they have the largest amount of shea nuts. Well, no, it's not. It's China and Europe.
You're
So
so
why is Africa not the greatest shea butter producer in the world? You go to Africa and they have shea butter all day long in the local village, and they use it, and it's the greatest product. But you go internationally, and you're not getting any of that local African shea butter. You're getting the mass-produced African shea butter from
yes.
China and Europe.
Yes.
It just blows a person's mind. So why not invest in that manufacturing in those countries to take value addition and increase the value of what they're producing so more of that value chain can stay in the country? West Africa, like cashew nuts, simple thing, right? You send the raw cashew nut to China for processing, and then the processed product from cashew nut gets shipped back to Africa so they can buy
Yes.
it back again.
Yes.
This does not make any sense. So why not invest in that kind of manufacturing in that country to retain the gold processing, the diamond processing? Why not have your own GIA gemologist laboratory with GIA certified people in Africa to process the diamonds, not ship them to India and other places where they get cut and polished so they could be shipped back, sold to the market? It doesn't make any sense. So why not do it in the country? Invest a little money. So I don't know if you want to jump to where those investments coming from, or we could do that in another question. But the Build Back Better is about building up and creating a sense of resiliency in countries so that they can be quality trading partners. And one of the side motivators of USAID and their programs that they have is to provide a more stable country, to reduce conflict and reduce the potential of terrorism or threats to the U.S.
Right.
So if we can stabilize a country, that means more than likely the rise of radicalism within that country is going to be a less of a threat to the U.S. And so that's where a lot of the motivation for the investments go.
You know, I
So
just
if I can build on
yeah, do
Lawrence
that.
position, the Build Back Better World, there are two sides of the Build Back Better. There's a Build Back Better World initiative, which was initiated with the G7 with the American involved, and there's a Build Back Better for the internal and the American system. So for the Build Back Better World, launched in 2021, it's actually to provide an alternative to the China Belt and Road Initiative, infrastructure development of low and middle income countries. And you can see the way China has actually invaded some countries in Africa with a lot of investment, and it's a very smart investment in the sense that the financing and everything coming from China to the point that the workers come from China. And I don't see that as an investment in empowering local content, in empowering technology transfer, in empowering knowledge transfer, which is what the Americans do better, which is we go in and the Americans go in, look at the local expertise, transfer knowledge, accelerate development of those local expertise, and make them to be self-sufficient to manufacture products that can go back to the United States. The second part of it is look at the Build Back Better. For example, the United States Department of Agriculture set aside a $4 billion to strengthen critical supply chain through the Build Back Better initiative in areas of food production, food processing, food distribution and aggregation, and of course the marketer consumers. So an example of the orange juice you just talked about in the Gambia there, did you know that 1/3 of the farm product actually never make it to the market? 1/3. They actually get destroyed because of lack of storage and lack of preservation systems. So around the whole world, they have 1/3 of the produced globally food are wasted. And if you look at Nigeria, for example, the last time I checked that data, it was 123 million metric tons of food never make it to the consumers. Now, this product comes in, and why those boys were using it as football is that they will get wasted at the end of the day. So they just taking it as something to play with. Now, these are opportunity where the Build Back Better initiative, like what you have in the US, could go into somewhere like the Zambia in Africa, get those products, develop way to preserve them, manufacture them to the standard. It has to be to the standard for export. And then you can take it as a cheap raw material. You can then compete with the likes of products that come from China. Now, you talk about manufacturing shea butter from China. There are three sides to the cost of produced goods in manufacturing: the cost of raw materials, the cost of energy to produce this product. And this is where energy poverty in Africa is another hindrance factor to seeing Africa develop. And this is what I'm trying to do myself in promoting energy developers in Africa, bringing down the cost of energy, making it very available so you can actually have the required resources for manufacturing companies to emerge out of Africa. Because without the base load power to power these industries, you would not be able to compete with the product that will come out of China. So the other thing is the resources, the human resources, which is the human capital. Now, the cost of labor in China is ridiculously cheap. The cost of labor in Africa is ridiculously cheap, but then the technical expertise for that product is missing. That's why accelerated training program, knowledge transfer, technology transfer becomes key important in local empowerment in meeting this objective.
Absolutely. What you guys said is totally true, so poignant and salient. I will give a shout out to a diaspora sister here in the United States who is doing work with shea butter. Her company is Shailene out of Ghana. So I definitely at all times when your name is spoken in rooms that you're not in, that means that you are well loved. She is doing her part in doing some manufacturing and giving local jobs. She has lots of local shops here in the United States. In Virginia, I'm not too far from Virginia. I'm right outside of DC myself. And we have Planters Peanut Factory. So I think about what are the opportunities. Again, when I was both in Ghana and Gambia, I saw peanuts. I was actually outside of Yarabumbum in the Gambia and saw truckloads of peanuts being, stored in a particular warehouse that didn't have the right storage facility, the temperature, etc. And we had, people were dealing with like mold and rot and etc. But they were being packaged so that they could go down to the port in Tangi to leave. And I was like, where are they going? I'm like, we could do stuff with peanuts. There was a black scientist in America who did a lot of inventions with peanuts. And I promise you, we have the technology. How can we partner with colleges in the United States and others to do that knowledge transfer to support? But it was actually going to partners. The farmers had a cooperative and they had an agreement to export, and their products were going back to China for processing. And if you've ever been in Senegal, I love Senegal, I love the Gambia, I love West Africa, but there's foods that are eaten a lot that have peanut butter in it, peanut butter sauce, peanuts, and all of that production when it comes back, again, you're going to the local market, and as a whole, you're buying your own product at 3 times the cost that is necessary. So I also think that there's room to start small because you have to start someplace. So not starting is not the answer, but starting small. And what does starting small look like? The other question that we have up on the table, if we don't have any more takers, for what's the benefit to the United States to have Africa as a manufacturing hub? That is the question that is on the table. Any other thoughts that would like to be shared before we move on to the next question?
Yes.
Go
Can I come in, Viola?
For $2,
If I'm audible.
come in, I promise.
Bongani.
Yes, come on in. Welcome.
You surely referring to me. Thanks, man. I've been listening. I for some reasons I've got lapses on the network this side. I don't know. I struggle sometimes to hear some of the speakers, but I think fundamentally should you don't hear me, please just state so that I can understand. You don't follow me, but fundamentally to the question on the table, I think the first speaker was more trying to highlight. I mean, it was very explicit in highlighting that there is a need for the stabilization of relations between consumption and production. That's therefore immediately aligned the African continent on the consumption side. That is one critical problem that needs to be addressed. Probably as we deal with the issues of investment, we might unpack that further. Two, there are issues around the orthodox financial framing of the world. The financing structural framework that we operate within in the globe, as to how the African continent fits within that those orthodox financial arrangements. There is no way that we will be able to really produce, to really be industrial, or to if we lack, we devoid financing sources. So the wherewithal of African countries not to have, or not to have.
So Bongani is having technical difficulty, as we understand, to the point of infrastructure and energy. Just what we're talking about right now, we're seeing it and we're experiencing it. When he is able to return to the screen, we'll add him back to the conversation so he can add his voice, his very important voice to the conversation. But we'll move on to this other question that we have here. There is a healing essence. This is my opinion. There is a healing essence to creating and utilizing the former trade routes of the Transatlantic. Those routes brought much harm to descendants of Africans from West Africa to the New World, to America. In your opinion, what are your thoughts on possibly reigniting those same routes again to make a connection for jobs that impacts both the inner cities of urban Americas, so your Chicagos, your Baltimores, your Atlantas, all of those urban inner cities, Boston, that are having much of the same problems and are mirroring the cities and rural villages of Africa. What are your thoughts on the possibilities of having jobs that are bicontinentally based in Africa, but have impact on both rural and urban inner cities, both in Africa and America? What are your thoughts? And Mr. Toure, I haven't heard from you. Come on to the conversation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Actually, I've been wanting to chip in, but then I realized someone was coming around the same time. So basically, with me, I really want to bring the focus on doing things different. There has been existing patterns. The problem we're facing now is because they don't work. And there is the need for reforms. There is the need for us to rethink and relook at the way we see things within the continent and how we look at our relation with the US, with other partners, with other side of the world and other regions. Now, I would also like us to look into wealth creation when it comes to transformation, whether it is industrialization. Where do we start first? In our relations, a lot can be done if these areas are strengthened. But number one, we have to know what do the African think about Africa and what do we refer to as wealth, as transformation, as riches, and the list goes on. Because to me, it starts with the mind. Some of the speakers did make mention of the gold. Yes, we have it here. The raw materials are here in the continent. Of course, every other region needs it for their own survival. That's already established. But us living within Africa, what do we think about this? How much can we add value to these resources? And what can we do in leading the transformation process? Are there the structures? Are there the institutions equipping young people on value additional, on transformational ideas through the education system from the societal setting? How much are our trade routes set as a continent? How is it easy for people to do business? How is it easy for the movement of individuals within the continent, for instance? And another very important component is what is the relation? Because someone made mention of the diaspora, for instance. We have the second generation Africans in the diaspora. We have these Africans who are of African descent in the diaspora, people who have acquired skills, they've acquired the knowledge. Some of whom have the resources beyond the skills and knowledge, but financially to invest in the continent. But where are the entry points? How do we welcome them in those investments? What is the political will across African government? What is the AU doing, for instance, to attract these investors into the continent and take the lead in leading the continental development? How do we receive the partnership between us and so many other countries? Yes. The question of how will this make good to the US government, perhaps the Biden administration, let us look at it this way. I'm speaking for myself and for my generation. It no longer makes me feel good for anyone to step in and maybe give out a borehole to a community. No, because I know the end games of that. I know how unsustainable some of those projects are. Having been traveling extensively around the continent, I've seen how much failures and how much resources have been put on need-based development, and it fails. The communities no longer see themselves within. There's no ownership. How do we redirect this? To start from the entry goals. What do the young African think about Africa? For someone aiming to go abroad, what is their motivation? Are these people running away? Or these are people who are hungry to go and acquire skills, knowledge, and come back and impact in their communities? I guess for any meaningful relation has to be strengthened from within these ends. Yes, when it comes to trade, there are benefits. When it comes to development and all those things, everyone in foreign policy, national interests matters, and they always put them at first. But this has to be guided with principles that are humanly, principles that make sense for both parties. Now, it would be very important for African stakeholders to rethink on this basis, redefine and put structures that will attract people living in the diaspora, governments wanting to interject, organizations wanting to do any meaningful development across the continent, to do it in a very, very meaningful way. You made mention of the case of the scenarios, for instance, in Tangier and the list goes on in the Gambia. Yes, these are communities. You see people taking charge of certain basic needs. As we speak, there are projects now installing solar panels using green energy for fish preservation, producing ice, and the list goes on. These are not done by communities here because they have the skills, but they don't have the knowledge, the financial muscles. It takes real partners. And that is where the diaspora chips in. That is where our collaborations, our relations with one government to another chips in. So if this can be addressed, I believe it's going to do something meaningful for both the continent and other communities that we partner with.
Wow, thank you for your wisdom and your words. I mean, it's just remarkable what you're saying. I'm joking here when I tell people $2 and $5, but it is me that owes all of you for sharing your time, for sharing your intellect, and driving that pathway forward. Your comments are actually laying the groundwork of what the pathway would look like and should look like in order to create the Africa we deserve, one of which is focused on socio-economic development that creates 1 million jobs across the continent by 2030. And manufacturing and production along the value chain happens to be, from what I'm hearing, the answer to that. And from your voice, Usman, I'm hearing, hey, how do we get more involved, the diaspora more involved? There's some entry points to making that happen, and there's some obstacles in the way, and we need to smooth those obstacles in order to make this a reality. Love your comments. The question again on the floor to everyone on the table here is, what are your thoughts on the possibility of and the impacts of linking via jobs the inner cities of urban America and rural Africa along the transatlantic slave routes that were there, that occurred, real history? What if we reimagined those routes to wipe away the pain or the shame, historical trauma, or to lessen it, maybe not wipe it away, but to utilize those roots again, those same roots that brought folks to North America, to the Caribbean, to South America, to Brazil, other places throughout, utilizing those same networks in a way that are creating jobs. What are your thoughts? What are the healing opportunities that we have before us to do that work?
So if I could pitch in a little bit, just to not to waste the time in 2 minutes, I came across an article that talked about the African Growth and Opportunity Act that was that came to play in the year 2000. And this act was actually put in place to have the U.S. economic policy and commercial engagement with Africa. The AGOA is supposed to provide an eligible sub-Saharan Africa countries with duty-free access to the U.S. market for over 1,800 products. And in addition to that, more than 5,000 products are eligible for duty access under the General System of Preference program. So this gives a new market opportunity that will help boost the economic growth and promote economic and political reforms and improve the U.S. economic relation in the region. Now, 3 months ago, the Afrexim Bank, which is the Africa Export-Import Bank, developed an initiative with the Caribbean. There was a Trans-African Caribbean Trade Investment Program, where a lot of African investors went to the Caribbean. I think it was hosted in Barbados, and look at how you can trace back the slave trade route into promoting business between the Caribbeans and the Africans, bringing experienced Africans in diaspora to come explore in Africa, and how they can bring their expertise to Africa, for example, in the area of agriculture. I think the next step I will expect to see with the United States government do is to create a kind of a trade agreement close to the NAFTA agreement with Africa, where you can actually expand AGOA into becoming a transatlantic trade agreement between the United States and Africa. So we can actually have a free flow of products, and reduce the barriers and the tariff barriers between Africa and the United States. Then that can give the diaspora the incentives to come into Africa, take these raw materials into finished product, and they can take back to Africa. Now, to answer some of the concerns raised by Torre, Africa has a lot to do in facilitating, and especially the African government, in facilitating the ability of this initiative to come to pass. There is a need for a government-to-government policy and regulatory framework alliance. It is fundamental for the government of Africa to look at their Foreign Investment Protection Act. Now, for foreign direct investment to come in, investors have to feel secure that my investment is going to be protected in the country where I'm going. So there have to be a very solid fiscal policies and dividend repatriation program, where you can actually invest in a country and you can free flow take your money out of that country as required. There's a need to have agreement between those regions in area of double taxation agreement, where taxation can be actually balanced to maximize the return on investment for an investor. It is not a charity activity to be sustainable. It has to make business sense for the investors coming in.
Mhm.
So it is important to create tariff incentives, tax breaks duration, like what Egypt did. I used to say insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. We need to copy and paste. Egypt did that. They created a development zone, a development producing zone,
That's right.
and they created a system where they want to empower this region, energize this region, and they were able to put some tax break, some deductions for any energy company coming to develop energy business in that region. So it can make your profitability faster. It can make you acquire back or recruit back your capital in setting up such businesses in the region. We all know that no government stay more than 4 years at any point in time. So it is important to be able to have a return on the investment as quick as possible, because sometimes in Africa, the instability from changing government
Right.
cuts out the business. So
Right.
it is important for government in Africa to do a lot more in giving that confidence to the investors to want to bring the investment to their country.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you for your comments. Africa is rising as a global partner. We can't escape that. That's a fact. What's the economic opportunity before us that we can build on to enhance the efforts of women and youth to maintain their current businesses or to enter the market and become entrepreneurs and expand their opportunities and options in life? Any thoughts there? Is Dr. Quentin with us still, or Dr. Quentin? We haven't heard from your voice, so please, in a while, please come on, and do you have some thoughts around that?
Thank you. I've had a little bit of a challenge with my connection, but I'm back on line now. I was going to probably reinforce some of my talking points on what I just heard from the last speaker, to basically indicate that the future competitiveness of our manufacturing sector in Africa will depend by and large on the capacity of this sector to deploy and master advanced technologies, as well as to innovate and to meet the precise needs of our customers. But to leverage on the US trade opportunities, technology is key.
Mm-hmm.
We need, I think, to look at the exportation of raw materials that most African countries have been doing and transform them to tradable, finished products and goods. So training becomes extremely important. And it is important for the youths and women to take advantage of various training opportunities that respective African countries may offer, especially in their higher and tertiary education system, as well as leverage on some of those opportunities that the US may offer. In Zimbabwe, we have reconfigured our education system to Education 5.0, which is heritage-based. What do we mean? We are basically focusing on impacting as well as transforming the raw materials, the naturally given raw materials that we are endowed with, and making sure that we add value in that value chain. And this has resulted in all universities having innovation hubs. And these innovation hubs are beginning to churn out startups as well as spin-offs. And the youths and women are actually being capacitated and being trained to be able to exploit some of these minerals, including transforming their ideas to finished products And by so doing, jobs are being created and opportunities for wealth creation and poverty reduction and alleviation and elimination are also being confronted that way. Maybe I can stop here and listen to others. But I just wanted to give you a quick overview of some of the areas that I was going to touch on.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm just going to break it down a little bit more for our listening audience and be really real. Where in the United States, there are young people who are languishing, who are disconnected, that are homeless, that don't have families, they can't see an opportunity, and thinking of reaching their 18th birthday is a far off thought. It's a hope, not a guarantee. There are same things that are happening in the United States of America, where I can drive down any city that I've lived in and see that infrastructure is poor. And I am not shaming my country, I'm just stating a reality. I love America just as much as I love Africa. And yet, when I go across the ocean in Jamaica, Barbados, any place that I've been, and in any rural village in Africa, in the same communities, there's the same thing happening. Kids, youth are disconnected. And in Africa, they're taking the risks with their lives to go across a large ocean, a back road, a back channel, to freedom, to opportunity, to a place that they feel that they can get hope, a job, a chance to breathe, their daily meal. So that's the underpinning of this question. Creating manufacturing in Africa, a bicontinental relationship for manufacturing and production between the U.S. and Africa. I believe that there's a hope that we can, as you said, Dr. Quinton, alleviate poverty. And I think the pathway to do that for and with our young people and youth happens to lie in that. And I do think that as we have these large hubs of warehouse and facilities in large, cities in the U.S., we too could do the same with Amazon. So you're, not creating an Amazon, but you have facilities that can create and store and your products at temperature that are managed for export, that are by the local port, that young people in the continent can be employed, that truck drivers, we have a shortage of truck drivers here in the United States of America. How can we create pathways forward for young people, for women on both continents, along the value chain, along the supply chain, that can give them an honest, livable wage, that can create an opportunity for stability, economic stability and vitality, and move them up the social economic ladder? That's important for me to do within my lifetime. I know that this is something all of you are working on, because somebody someplace is crying right now, because they don't have a hot meal. They don't have a secure place to stay on both continents. And I want to be an answer to that cry. And so that is why we're asking these really tough questions, to really help the Biden-Harris summit to level up from people who are both on the continent, from leaders like yourselves that are doing the work every day in the continent through your businesses that you're trying to make your mark, to make the relationship between Africa and America stronger, and to grow Africa in development for its own sovereignty. The next question that we have here on the table is, what, in your opinion, just your thoughts, what is the right next business step that needs to be taken now to solidify a pathway forward to realize the potential of creating wealth acceleration for establishing Africa as a manufacturing hub? If you could give advice right now to the Biden-Harris administration and to your to your presidents and leaders in Africa, what would you say is the right next step to take in order to create this conversation into reality, into creating a manufacturing and production hub in the continent of Africa?
So if I could jump in.
Viola?
Well, I was very critical of the previous government in the U.S., the previous administration, in their ability to be very reactionary to situations that arise in Africa, to be more competitive to China in their investments, to be solutions oriented. The creation of the DFC, I don't know if people are familiar with the DFC, but the U.S. Development Finance Corporation is a government entity that was created to combine resources from USAID, OPIC, and some others as a consolidated resource to be very reactive to situations in Africa, to be more responsive, to be solutions oriented. Combine the DFC with the US Exim Bank and the capabilities that the US Exim Bank provides in investments for opportunities like manufacturing, infrastructure, energy, all these things. And that's an advantage of being from the US, that we have these resources to leverage. There are some resources internally within Africa: the African Development Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, you mentioned the Africa Exim Bank. You also have the European Bank, Reconstruction and Development Bank, that is heavily involved. There's some climate funds that are available. There's some bond market funds that are available for investments for these kinds of solutions in Africa. Like I said, you have to have a financial package to go along with these projects to do these development projects. So what is the answer? What's the solution? How do you move from where we are to where we want to go? For in the foundation for me, for all of the sustainable development goals, any economic development program must start with agriculture. Agriculture is foundational across the board for every economy. You have to have it's not petroleum based economies anymore. We see that market go up and down, it's not stable. But agriculture, like most economies used to be based on agriculture, needs to be foundational. It needs to be, there's words being thrown around like climate resilient agriculture, but let's talk about climate proof agriculture. How do you climate proof your agriculture? And how do you then reduce or eliminate post-harvest loss? Like they were talking about, the Rockefeller Foundation did a massive amount of research on post-harvest loss. So if you can't do cold storage and cold storage transport, or if you're not doing right away processing of your uh, food goods into other products that don't need to be refrigerated, you have to provide those off-grid standing solutions for cold storage and cold storage transport. And it has to be in a sea-bearing container cold storage for international markets if you're going to target those. But now with the Africa Free Trade Agreement, don't need to go internationally. You can go internationally on the same continent with reducing your logistics demand and expense. So where we stand with this, to use a mix of circular economy when we talk about food production. So the livestock has one side of it. So how do you do livestock sustainably? Because it's being criticized heavily now with carbon emissions. You can do livestock indoors and you can capture the carbon emissions from the livestock and pump those carbon emissions. It's sometimes referred to as an organic LPN gas.
Yeah.
But you can package them, or you can transmit those carbon emissions into a plant production facility. So now you can do your food production plant wise indoors, either hydroponically or aquaponically. In my world, it's aquaponically because that way you have the fish production as well. And then the plants then use that carbon dioxide. But the waste from the livestock, you then harvest that in an underground container so that you can get the gases from that to help power the facility. And the leftover solid waste is your fertilizer for traditional based fertilizers. Because not everything you're going to want to grow indoors, like your maize, your soybeans, things like that, your tropa, cotton, industrial plants. You're going to want to grow those out in the fields, and you're going to need fertilizers. So many countries have told me, well, we've got the most fertile soil. We can grow anything. I said, well, the reason why you have the most fertile soil? Because you haven't done industrialized agriculture. As soon as you do industrialized agriculture, you'll be a slave to the fertilizer industry. And if you're going to use heavy chemical fertilizers, which most products are, you're going to be destroying the natural microbiology in the soil. and that destroys the ability of the soil to be able to feed the plants. And then you're going to be even more of a slave to the fertilizer industry. And that's the last thing you want to do. I can admonish Kenya all day long for accepting the GMOs, because I think it's a good stand for Africa to stand as unity to reject the GMOs. There's no need for GMOs if you don't have the threat of the environment. So let's talk about agriculture technologies to be able to do things better on the continent, to be self-sufficient and self-reliant in that form. So foundationally, it's agriculture. Then you can talk about agriculture needs energy, so you have to have your energy production, and then you can talk about solar. Some places you can have wind. Hydro is a solution. Geothermal is a solution. Biogas is a solution. There's all these solutions out there that are renewable. If you want to use your corn and soybeans for biogas or other means to produce energy, there's solutions out there to do that. But you have to have those solutions in place in your plan, and you have to have them properly financed, if I'm making sense here. And then
Absolutely.
communication, right? Everybody's having struggle in Africa being able to stay online. Communications is a net issue. Telecommunications. There are some undersea cables that come to Africa, but if you're not accessing the satellite market, or putting up your own satellites, by bringing in that broadband to your country or the region and redistributing that effectively. And again, that's another plan. It has to be properly financed. And then the off-taker agreements with the contracts, with the communities, the businesses for those services. So all those plans have to be properly developed and properly financed to make them happen. They can happen. This is a reality. It has to happen in order for things to move forward. My 2 cents.
I appreciate your 2 cents. I love the analogies to money that we're making here, because it makes sense, right? You have to have sense in order to make sense. So we have in our final minutes here that we have before I come to my closing question, and Shiraz takes over the floor to really to close us out here. This conversation could not have happened without all of you saying yes. So I want to thank you now and tell you, you've been amazing, and I appreciate each one of you coming on here, and I also appreciate the challenges that we are having with technology and with energy, because that really matters, because it's showcasing that this stuff is real. Really polished people around the globe doing amazing work, and we're showcasing in live in the moment the infrastructure. I want to really take this moment to say thank you to Pitch World Fast for his partnership and his friendship as we are journeying together to conduct our side events for the U.S. Africa Leader Summit happening next week, December 13th and 15th. I want our listening audience to know to stay tuned. There will be announcements of all of those events on websites being released. Stay tuned to all of our channels. You will see them, and we hope that you do come out to have conversation. Our next conversation is on December 10th, a virtual conversation with Pitch Real Fast and partners. It will be a live pitch competition. We will share the link and information and adverts. So we encourage individuals who are having solutions to Africa to come online, showcase your product, your business, your services live to investors and get broadcasted. The next 2 events that we will have after that will be live and in person in Washington, D.C. And so we invite everyone who can, a part of the listening audience, to come out. We'll take really 2 really short and brief comments to wrap up this question. Then we have a final question that I will ask, and the Shiraz will take the floor. After that, as we close out, I invite our panelists to stay in studio, and behind the scenes, we will have a small 5 to 7 minute conversation, and we will complete our time together. So the question here on the floor for brief comments is, in your opinion, right now, what's the right next business move in order to bring to life manufacturing in the continent of Africa that has bi-continental benefits? If you could advise your president You could advise the leaders at the U.S. Africa Leader Summit. What would you say? What's the right next business move? The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Let me just quickly chip in. And thank you so much, Doctor, for having set the standard on the agricultural sector. To be honest, that is the entry point for any community's development. And I definitely commend you for the efforts of the continent. However, I would just like to mention that, you see, for the stories of the young people that are leaving the continent, drowning in the Mediterranean Sea, moving to different sectors, most of these young people are not youths that do not have skills. They are not youths that do not have knowledge. They have the skills. The problem is they are not compensated for those skills in their various countries. Someone will be specialized in something. Recently, I was on a flight and I saw a young lady, a fashion designer, moving to the Gulf to be a housekeeper. And this happens a lot, and it is across the continent. We're seeing it on a daily basis. Now, a best entry model for me would be, how do we invest in building the platform for these young people that beyond just engaging in person, we can use technology to mentor them across the continent, use it as a hub, make it a power force on technology, on agriculture, on entrepreneurship. How do we connect these people beyond the physical borders to do business on their own? How do we make sure that more effort is also being pushed into the Africa continental free trade? Yes, it's good to do business in the US. But before going all the way to the US, why not do business with Senegal? Why not do business with Ghana? Why not do business with Nigeria? To be honest, we have not even set these things in order. And that's where the problem is. We can't open and do things well globally if our own homes is not set. So, for a proper business model, for a proper government intervention, we have to address these key things. Put young people together, tap into their skills, compensate them for this knowledge, and give them a platform to exhibit those potentials within the continent and then export beyond. Thank you.
Fantastic. Anyone else want to come to the floor and offer your advice on the best next move to make to bring this to life? If you were advising anyone on how to make this happen, what would you say?
So Viola, real quick, like you say, quick comments. I would encourage the U.S. government to reinvest in AGOA, reinvest in the XM, reinvest, because the legislative authority has that responsibility. I would encourage them to continue to reinvest in these well-established entities that they created that are working really, really well. It's important to have that investment. I would encourage on the other side as well, both Europe and Africa, to continue to reinvest in these opportunities to support the funds that are already there. China is heavily invested in the Africa Development Bank.
Mm-hmm.
Why are not other people, large entities, investing in these entities that can fund these solutions? I will offer to Brother Toure, to any business that wants to put together a business plan to bring themselves to the point where they are shovel ready, I will offer services free to help them understand the requirements of the funders so that they can put together the proper business plan so that they can become investor ready or shovel ready, as the phrase is.
Mm-hmm.
So I will help support any business that wants to develop themselves so that they're financially ready for investors. And when they are ready at that point, I can bring the people who can put together the financial packages together to make those things happen. And we talk about a strategic plan to develop countries. So I'll make that commitment to you, brother.
So I want you guys to know part of you staying on in studio afterwards is to make a connection. And we do that here through the International Institute. So don't worry, you guys will be connected and we will be action oriented. Trust me, you'll be annoyed with me, but we will be action oriented. Any other comment for that particular question? If you could give advice right now, what would the next step be? Please feel free to add your voice.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and I totally agree with Toure and Dr. Lawrence. But one of the challenges Toure actually Usman mentioned earlier is the system, like whether it's the policy. You can have all these platforms bringing young people, but actually the system need to reform, because at the moment the environment is not even conducive to even get the investors to work with these young people. I'll give you an example in the Gambia at the moment, and I think this is where we need to actually work together. There's so many investors going to the Gambia. I was there recently, but you talk to one person, and then in fact, when you bring an investor, you go back, it doesn't work because the plans are not actually they are not actually follow up, and then the systems are very slow. It seems that sometimes people don't really care about like the next step, and before you realize, they actually put you aside and try to talk to the investor, and everything collapsed. So we need to really work on the system reform is very key in this. Without that, I think it will be very difficult. I know we will have probably more time to discuss how do we work these things out, because I think we have solutions. Both the diaspora you mentioned and the people back home, I think we can have systems, but we need to actually really fight to make sure that the systems are conducive for all the things that we are talking about, to make sure that they can actually happen on the ground.
I appreciate it. We've been here in this conversation for almost 90 minutes, for an hour and a half. And the next phase of this, of the how and the doing comes in, because everyone has the how in their head. You guys are all experts. Now the doing takes place. And the one small effort that we can collectively get behind in one small country that we collectively decide on as a team will be the conversation that we're having in studio after this, as a contribution of how we can come forward. Because we're not just a bunch of talking heads that can pontificate. We're a group of people who can come together and actually create change. And that's why all of you were selected individually by myself and Shiraz, and by the powers that be, the ancestors that guide us together, because I don't believe things happen by accident. As my final closing question, before Shiraz comes to the floor here, is we often hear all the time about the ills of Africa, the children who are starving, the fights, the war, the degradation that is occurring there, the famine, etc. What's right with Africa? One sentence, what's right with Africa?
So if I can go with that, what is right with Africa?
Mm-hmm.
So what is right with Africa is the fact that Africa is endowed with a lot of raw materials. Africa has this arable land that is available for agriculture to actually feed the world. And from what I see and what I know about Africans, they are very welcoming people. And the continent have 20% of the world oil reserve, 42% of the world gold, and 80 to 90% of the chromium and platinum materials that we need in the world, and 60% of arable land in addition to vast timber resources. One thing about Africa is that we are willing to share those resources. We are willing to partner with international communities to help develop it for the benefit of Africans and for our friends outside Africa. But more importantly, Africa is aspiring to be the organization that wants to develop and produce products for us, by us, just like Fugu.
Just to add to that as well, Africa is endowed with a huge natural resource base. We need to move from the basic commodity production and exportation of raw materials to high value-added products. But these require more capital, technology, and skills. If we move to that higher value-added platform of production of goods, we have enough wealth to support the very youth and challenges that Africa is facing. Technological innovation influences technological development, and the capability of our industries to manufacture quality products is dependent on our ability to put a proper innovation ecosystem which is supported by high-tech equipment which can convert those very raw materials that we're exporting abroad to high value added activities. I agree that we need to develop coherent policies which require very careful balancing between promotion of our own indigenous enterprises and institutions, as well as making sure that the induction of suitable technologies and formulation of those policies will enhance our technological capability through licensing and mastering and reproduction of the same technology, so that we improve not only the quality of products that we can export and also do intertrade amongst ourselves as a continent, but also effectively respond to market demands. Thank you.
Thank you all so very much. Shiraz is going to take the floor here and give closing remarks. But what I would like to let everybody know for what's right with Africa is you are what is right with Africa. For those of us who were born of the blood of the continent, and those of us who are lovers of the continent, you are what is right with Africa. And I appreciate each and every one of you for being here, for your time. And we give Shiraz from Pitch Roll Fast closing remarks here. Please, Shiraz, come on to the floor and stay in studio, everyone else, as Shiraz gives her closing remarks to surmise our conversation today.
Thank you so much, first of all, to all our speakers for their amazing inputs, and Viola for the amazing moderation. And yes, like you were saying, what is right with Africa, I think this conversation makes it, this is what is right about Africa. We were talking about manufacturing today and seeing how to create a real value added for both parties. And I think this is what is so important and came out from me from these exchanges. The first off is we have to remind ourselves that Africa is a standalone, and meaning that we need, as African, to foster our strength, to really build on our wealth and our resources, be it whether the natural resources or the human resources, and to make sure actually that our continent play the roles that it can play in the value chain and in the transformation on any of our project. We really need to make sure that we are building the right ecosystem, that we're building the right environment in a large sense, so that the youth, the women, all our population can really tap into the opportunity and create even more wealth, transform what is God-given at the end of the day, transform what we have in our soil in a real and even greater wealth. We talked about how agriculture is a pillar of our continent, and that we need to feed our population, obviously, but goes hand in hand with it, the transformation, so that we're not seen as a continent only as raw material or raw material supplier or just a consumer, but really value added. And this is also what could be, like we were saying, to make sure that it's a win-win relationship, and that is winning for the American counterpart and for Africa. It means that really seeing how together as equal, we're actually exchanging. We are learning from each other. For sure, we have a lot to learn from Africa, from the United States, and looking at all these expertise and this technology transfer, knowledge transfer, but tapping into the local expertise as well. So I think from what all the presenters have been saying, we obviously have a lot on our continent. There's a lot to do. We have a lot of initiatives even on the continent. They were talking in Zimbabwe about education 5.0. We're talking about digitalization, the fourth industrial revolution. We're talking about all of these amazing opportunities, all of this opportunity that we need to really leverage. And Dr. Sheffer was talking about how there's no pathway from developing to developed countries. But I think what would be right for us is really, as African first, to build our own journey, and in the relationship between the US and Africa, to make sure that it is our own relationship, that it benefits populations from the US, from the continent, and at the end of the day, for everyone. So thank you so much all for all the inputs that you have put to us and the start of this conversation, because it is an open discussion. And Viola said it right. We talked today, there's a lot of discussion, but now it is about walking the talk and what are the kind of action we can do, what are potentially the pilot projects or the pilot initiatives that we need to really bring to reality, to not only see the potential we have on the continent or see the potential between Africa and the US, but to really bringing it to life, changing the narrative, and seeing it for actually the betterment of everyone. Thank you so much.
Shiraz, thank you so very, very much for your closing comments there and surmising this great conversation today. That does it for our talk today. Thank you. This conversation has been live and it is on all of the channels of the International Institute and will be housed as well on Pitch World Fast. So check it out there. Stay tuned to the action that comes from this conversation. Appreciate you all. Have a great day.
Yeah.